I'm Mark Elliott in for Kasem. Now we're up to the story of how learning to just say no saved Aerosmith from rock and roll extinction. In the 70s, Aerosmith seemed to be on top of the world with hit albums like Toys in the Attic, Rocks, and Draw the Line. Fans thrilled to the high-intensity combination of lead singer Steven Tyler and guitarist Joe Perry. But at the same time Aerosmith was having its biggest success, the band was also destroying itself. Particularly Steven Tyler, who says, quote, "It's a miracle I'm here. I should be dead. There were enough toxins in me to kill 10 people. In the 70s, we thought it was cool to do drugs. I thought I was cool, but I paid the price. The price Steve and his group paid, both personally and professionally, was high. Steve says he and the other Aerosmith members began to fight among themselves all the time. Their shows suffered because they cared more about getting high than playing music. Finally, the band collapsed. Joe Perry left, followed by guitarist Brad Whitford. The band's record sales slipped, and then Steve mangled his foot in a motorcycle accident. He says, quote, "I laid there in the hospital crying and flipping out, knowing some other group was going to step into our space." Finally, in 1984, the band decided to try and reclaim that space for themselves. Joe and Brad returned to the group. Steve looked around and found a drug treatment program. Like Steve, the other Aerosmith members decided to face their drug and alcohol problems and to learn to say no. The result of the drug ordeal is a clean and sober Aerosmith, back from the brink of extinction. Steve says, quote, "We'll do anything we can to make kids aware of how bad that junk is. It'll kill you. Hopefully, they'll listen to someone like me. I've been there." And now that he's back from there, Steve's helping to dish out some more of the high-energy rock that's been Aerosmith's trademark. This week, the new and improved band bows in at number 38 with Love in an Elevator.
Casey's Coast to Coast.
Well, now on Casey's Top 40, we're up to a man who certainly doesn't project the image of being a perfect gentleman. He's one of the most outrageous rockers on the charts today, a heavy metal hero, and he loves classical music. You know, there aren't many musicians whose image says rock and roll more clearly than Steven Tyler, lead singer of Aerosmith. On stage, Steven's the center of the group with his long hair, flowing scarves, dark leather, and flashy spandex outfits. Over the years, Steven Tyler has really rocked out on songs like Dream On and Walk This Way, which is why it's a little bit surprising to discover that Steve's roots are deeply buried in the fertile soil of classical music. Steve's grandmother, grandfather, and two of his uncles played professionally in a chamber music group. His father was a professional classical pianist, trained at New York's prestigious Juilliard School of Music. And so it was only natural that Steven Tyler, who was born Stephen Victor Tallarico, also grew up playing classical music. So why did he become a rocker? Well, Steven told us, quote, "I got bitten by the rock bug when the Stones and Beatles came along. I'd sit around with my friends playing the Yardbirds and the Who, trying to figure out what it would be like to be part of a real rock band. There was no way I could go back to classical after I got a taste of rock and roll." But that's on stage and on records. When Steven gets off the road and goes home to relax, he still likes to sit at his piano and bring back his childhood. That's when you might hear him playing a piece of Bach, Beethoven, or even a little Chopin. Well, this week, the hard rocker with the classical heart won't get much of a chance to sit at a piano. Here's Steven Tyler and Aerosmith with What It Takes.
Casey's Top 40.
Radio plays them, Radio and Records ranks them, and we count them down on Casey's Top 40. Now, we're up to the latest hit for a hard-rockin' band from Boston who used to begin their shows by taking a shot of 151 proof rum. These days, they begin every show with a plate of spaghetti and a potato. When they went out on tour back in the late 1970s, Aerosmith routinely demanded that a Thanksgiving-style roast turkey dinner be waiting for them backstage, along with several cases of beer and liquor. As a rule, the band didn't touch the turkey dinner at all, but they drank up lots of the booze. And they had a band ritual of downing a big shot of 151 proof rum right before they stepped on stage. Now, a decade later, things sure are different for a clean-living Aerosmith. These days, the band's touring contract includes a paragraph printed in boldface capital letters declaring that no alcoholic beverages of any sort are allowed anywhere on the tour. That goes for the band and everyone who works with the band. And instead of having turkey and liquor before a show, Aerosmith's backstage spread now consists of organic peanut butter and preserves, rice cakes, dry roasted soybeans, and distilled water. Lead singer Steven Tyler says, quote, "Just before we go on stage, we each have a huge hot plate of al dente spaghetti and a baked potato. That's carbo loading to give us the energy we need." He says the band needs healthy fuel to keep them going. Quote, "Our days of living on drugs, drink, and junk food are ancient history. And all that clean living is paying off, too. Aerosmith is more successful than ever. This week, that well-fed heavy metal band climbs 4 notches to number 34 on Casey's Top 40. Here's Aerosmith with The Other Side.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem. These are the hits you're buying and radio stations are playing from coast to coast. Now we're up to Livin' on the Edge, the 7th top 10 for a band that spent a decade living on the edge. There are many tales told of the excesses of the rock and roll band called Aerosmith. And the group's flamboyant lead singer, Steven Tyler, recently told the LA Times many of those stories are true, and they only begin to scratch the surface. He admits that he and his fellow band members went through many sad years of too much drink and too many drugs. Steven says he was often so far gone, he didn't know where he was or even who he was. One tough day, Steven had to fly from Boston to Los Angeles, but he was in such a haze that he got the wrong tickets and got on the wrong plane. And even then, it took him quite a while to realize he wasn't in Los Angeles, he was in Tampa, Florida. Steven says he was so drugged out, he had problems with his memory. One day he called a limousine to pick him up, and then forgot all about it. 2 full days later, when Steven stumbled out of his house, there was the limousine driver waiting. You see, the limo driver had dealt with Steven and Aerosmith before and knew anything was possible. But some of Steven's scariest times with drink and drugs were when he completely lost track of where he was. One hazy night, he was so out of it, he wandered around his street and couldn't figure out which house was his. After stumbling around for a while, he finally gave up and checked into a fancy hotel around the corner. As you might expect, Steven Tyler is happy that he has put those drinking and drugging days behind him. These days, he's clean and sober, and his music is as strong as ever. This week, along with Aerosmith, he has survey song number 20 on Casey's Top 40. Here's Livin' on the Edge.
Casey's Top 40.
Well, now we're up to the top 10 smash, Amazing. And it's by an award-winning band whose charismatic lead singer says, amazingly, he used to be the ultimate nerd. He was born Stephen Victor Tallarico into a very musical family in New York City. Both his father and grandfather were successful classical musicians. And from the time he was a little boy, Stephen had dreams of following in their footsteps. But he had a big problem with his self-confidence. You see, he grew up tall and gawky. He was always the tallest student in class, and his schoolmates would often laugh at him and make fun of his odd-looking teenage body and what they thought was his funny face. After a while, Stephen says he began to feel like, quote, a freak, the ultimate nerd, a real hyper-nerd. Soon, Stephen withdrew into himself, and any time he did try to participate in school, he'd do something goofy, like the time he tripped and knocked over a whole table of light bulbs in his physical science class. Stephen says he remembers that as the bulbs broke, he could hear everyone, even the teacher, laughing at him. Things like that made him feel terrible. And luckily, he discovered the world of rock and roll, which quickly became the only place he could be happy. Stephen taught himself to play guitar and started writing songs. And in time, the ugly duckling named Stephen Victor Tallarico became the rock and roll superstar named Steven Tyler. This week, along with the band Aerosmith, former nerd Steven Tyler has survey song number 13 on Casey's Top 40.
Casey's biggest hit.
2 years ago this week, one of the biggest hits in the USA was Crazy by a hard rock band that's had 2 separate lives, a hard living life in the 70s and a totally sober life in the 80s and 90s. The first time around for Aerosmith, the sky was the limit. They say their alcohol and drug consumption was monumental, and that led to a complete crash for band leaders Steven Tyler and Joe Perry in 1980. But after a half a decade of getting clean and sober, they got another chance. Aerosmith came back in 1987, and in the years that followed, they scored with their biggest hits ever, including the song that was one of the biggest hits in the USA 2 years ago this week. Here's Aerosmith with Crazy.
Come here, baby. You know you drive me up a wall the way you make good for all the nasty tricks you pull. I go crazy, crazy, baby. I go crazy.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem, and rising 3 notches to 22 on Casey's Top 40 is Aerosmith, a veteran group that's played thousands of shows in their 25-year career. Yet singer Steven Tyler says they never get tired of playing some of their classic hits over and over again. Quote, "When you're in front of an audience, it's like pressing a reset button. You're playing the song again for a brand new crowd, so you're not even thinking about how old the song is. It's new again. You're serving the same dish, but to a different customer." Unquote.
American Top 40.
And that means we're up to the number 1 song in the USA, a smash by a hard rock band whose flamboyant lead singer says he has a dream. He wants to sing ballads backed up by a 20-piece orchestra. Steven Tyler says that's the music he grew up with at the Tro Rico resort that his family owned in the vacation town of Sunapee, New Hampshire. Steven says one of the reasons he became involved with rock and roll was to rebel against that music. Instead of playing Sinatra, he played the Stones. But as he's matured, he's come to appreciate just how good that music was, and how good it still is. Steven Tyler says, quote, "It's the music I listen to in order to unwind after a show. That was great music that existed on a lot of different levels." What Steven Tyler says he'd like to do is a tour where he combines classic ballads with ballad versions of rock songs by his band, like Dream On. He says, quote, "I'd do it with a 20-piece orchestra, lots of horns and strings, real schmaltz. I think it'd be great." Unquote. It's a great idea that'll have to wait, because right now the band is busy wrapping up their latest tour and enjoying the success of their latest hit, a ballad that once again is the biggest hit in the land. The number 1 song in the USA on American Top 40 for the 7th week in a row is I Don't Want to Miss a Thing by Aerosmith.
I could stay awake just to hear you breathing, and I don't want to miss a thing.
Casey's Coast to Coast.
From the rising stars to the superstars, we have them for you on our special year-end edition of AT40. 2001 was a great year for Aerosmith. The band played at the Super Bowl. Their latest album, Just Push Play, went platinum, and they won the International Artist Award at the American Music Awards. Here's Aerosmith kicking off the top 20 with Jaded. The song sets down at number 20 on our year-end survey. That's the oldest artist in the countdown, 53-year-old Steven Tyler, strutting and singing lead with Aerosmith on Jaded.
America's Top Hits.
This week back in 1987, one of the top hits in the USA was Dude Looks Like a Lady. It's the song that brought a major rock band back to the charts after everyone had written them off as gone forever. In the mid-70s, the Boston band Aerosmith was hailed by many as America's answer to the Rolling Stones. They hit big back then with Dream On and Walk This Way. But by the end of the decade, the band had fallen apart, destroyed by drugs and drink. Conventional wisdom was that they were finished. But then, after years of rehab, Aerosmith was born again. And the song the band came back with was this one. This week back in 1987, Aerosmith had one of the top hits in the USA with Dude Looks Like a Lady.